It's 2025, and the average bachelor's degree costs $60,000 to $160,000. Also, you can land a job making $70,000. Yeah, that's a sign of an excellently working system, isn't it? And that's without factoring in interest and how the taxes and costs of living expenses turn a $70K income into more like $50K. So what? We've all known that the education system's been broken for a while, but do we fully realize just how broken it is? How can you not go to college and wind up making more money than someone who did? And I don't mean as someone who landed in some insanely rare or lucrative job. I mean just being someone who played their cards correctly right out of high school and have reaped the rewards for doing so. You want to know how to play that hand, I bet. And I'm here to tell you how. And all in the time that it takes me to beat the pants off this gold team and rivals. Let's set the record straight. I fell for the college trap myself. It's the narratives that schools write and indoctrinate our children to earlier and earlier each generation. My 9-year-old niece is already talking about what colleges she'll be going to. At this rate, my grandkids' generation will be talking about colleges when they are wee kindergartners. You were sold the lie. I was sold the lie. So many of us were sold that lie. It's an American way that's been such since the end of World War II. That's correct. An event that ended 80 years ago and is remembered by less than 5% of our population has dictated the American way ever since. I don't know about you, but I don't think the modern American society should be dictated by an 80-year-old standard. Things change, and the advent of technology has dropped a nuke on society within the last 30 years, so then why go back 80 years to set the standard? That's bound to look like the Stone Ages by comparison. But here we are in 2025, and still having the goals of college shoved down our gullets. This is obviously done for the profit of colleges that still control the system, and so many of us feed into it without question. I was lucky in that I was grown up on a debt-free ideology. My parents hadn't been so fortunate, but they were determined to have something better for their kids. Maybe you were lucky enough to have parents who shouldered the burden of higher education so that you didn't have to. Or perhaps you were smart about how you colleged and you found a way to do so for little to no cost at all. But I'm willing to bet that you, like so many others, are in it for some unforeseen amount of money, and you're just now seeing that the jobs out there offer a pretty lame return on investment. With my parents' debt-free mentality drilled into my head, I went to college on a 2-year scholarship and almost graduated with a 2-year IT certification in networking. And I'm ashamed to admit that still to this day, with 10 years supply chain experience under my belt and 4 years of leadership experience, my schooling remains to be the one thing I receive the most questions about in regards to my resume. It's honestly wild. Like, I'm not even applying for IT jobs. What difference does my schooling make at that point? Enter the toxic mentality of degree inflation. So many employers have adopted the idea that their leadership positions are reserved for well-educated people. So much so that they don't even care about what kind of degree you have, so long as you just have one. My brother works for a warehouse, and they refuse to consider people for supervisor positions unless they have a degree. Their HR went so far as to say that they don't care what the degree is for. It could be for underwater basket weaving for all they care, so long as it's a degree. This company is opening him up to $160,000 worth of debt for a $70,000 salary. That may not sound so bad on the outside, right? Basic math dictates that you'll have that $160,000 paid off in 3 years roughly, right? Wrong. You know it's wrong, and I don't have to get into why. But that's the truest damage in our schooling system. They sell this lie to our children when their minds are most impressionable. Teenagers who understand basic math enough to know that $70,000 times 3 is more than $160,000, so therefore they'd have done paid off their college degree in 3 years. These teens don't know the general cost that living will have. They don't teach that in school. They don't teach those things in school. And I'm forced to wonder if there's a real reason behind that. So we've established how society, schools, and employers apply college pressure to us, but do you know how we as individuals might apply that very same pressure? I'm in an interesting dynamic at work these days. I'm a manager and I don't really have a degree. I have some higher education that was put towards a certification, which I ultimately didn't acquire. My boss has a bachelor's and is rather proud of it and still believes in that system. He's kind of pressured into having to believe in it. He is, after all, a product of that system. And if he acknowledges its flaws, then he in turn acknowledges being a victim of that system. And some of us really have issues with being wrong. I work for an employer who values degrees and experience in the same bucket. All of their roles weigh experience versus a degree, as in if you have 4 years worth of experience in that field, then that's worth the same as a 4-year degree in the same field. I find that to be a fair hiring practice, and as a hiring manager myself, I use that ideology to fill my positions. My boss, however, he wants us to lean towards hiring people with higher education, because he believes in the value those degrees hold. And that's how we as people even perpetuate the problem. We're unable to put our own egos aside and recognize that our way isn't the only way, or maybe not even the best way to do things. I, as a hardworking workhorse kind of person with minimum higher education, frequently outperform someone with a master's degree. And thank goodness my employer rewarded that work and that drive. I'm not confident, though, that I would have gotten this job if my current boss were here at the time I was promoted. And I'm sure I wouldn't have gotten it just based on the fact that I don't have a degree. So I lucked out there, and I worked my butt off. That's how I landed in my situation, making more without a degree than someone with one. But I acknowledge that to some, this can be seen as an unusual circumstance, and I, after all, promised you a way to play your cards and make more without a degree rather than with one. And we're getting there. I just needed to set the stage first. I also need to put it out there that there will always be jobs out there that require a degree and a healthy dose of schooling. But those jobs are the exceptions to the norm, not like how society would have you believe that the opposite is in fact the normal. These jobs are your doctors, your lawyers, these really highfalutin, high society roles. What it all really comes down to is math, and for this equation, I'll use the story of a buddy and me. While I was starting at the entry level of my job, we had an intern come in who was part of some master's program. I had already established my life's plan by then, and he obviously had his own plan, the more traditional one. We'd frequently tease each other as to the effectiveness of each other's plans. It was a friendly teasing, but we'd always be challenging the way we'd planned to live out our lives. When his time with our department ended, I told him to call me when his master's program finished and when he landed his first job. We could compare stats then. We sealed that with a handshake, and I went about my business. Fast forward several years, gosh, I don't know really how long it had been, but I had bought a new phone and was transferring over my contacts from my old phone to my new one. I stumbled across this guy's number and remembered our little wager. I texted him with my new number, and I asked if he'd be up for a call. I have to thank him for how open he was on that call so that we could more clearly compare our notes to see who truly came out on top. Pardon me, as this part will get a little bit mathy, but it's the best way I know how to explain this. He landed a good job, making $106,000 a year. His take-home pay was around $6,446 to be exact. I was making $75K at the time, and my take-home pay was $4,532. So right out the gate and on the surface, he looked to be doing better than I, right? Well, so let's run the numbers on his expenses versus mine. He was paying $1,457 a month for his degree, $2,200 a month for the rent in his apartment in Chicago, and $737 for his car loan. This leaves him actually with around $2,052 in take-home money. In the time he was going to school, I paid off my car and built my own home, leaving me with minimal life expenses. My student loans are at zero, my car payment is at zero, and minus $480 for my home loan, and the money that I truly have left in my pocket at the end of each month is $4,052. So, after all our expenses, my actual take-home pay, the money in my pocket at the end of each month was double his, despite his salary being more than $2,000 higher than mine. Now that was back in 2023, and I know my numbers have changed since then, and I'd imagine so has his. But who knows? I'm thinking I'm still ahead on that one. The fact remains, though, that despite his job paying a higher salary than mine, his cost to get that salary wasn't getting a great return on investment. And he said he was being pretty selective as to which jobs he'd accept. But even so, that was the best job he could land, given his credentials but overall lack of experience. So it's not all sunshine and rainbows like the schools would have us fooled into believing. More so, never take the numbers on their surface value. His $6,000 paycheck looked all nice and pretty until I peeled back the curtain and saw what his take-home pay really was. In short, my technique comes down to lifestyle. Live within your means and build to that better lifestyle. I paid for a brand new car while I was living with my parents on a salary of $9 an hour. Discipline and savings can go very far as well, but lifestyle really drives the bus on this one. During the 6 years he spent getting into debt for a higher salary, I spent setting myself up for financial success. We both lived with our parents through that 6-year stretch as well, so it's the most direct comparison that I really can make. Wealth is more than just the amount of money you make. Anyone who's worth their salt and understands finance understands this concept. Just think it as plainly as the difference between your gross pay and your take-home pay. Your paycheck goes through 2 filters before it reaches your wallet, and that's the best way to visualize it. The first filter comes from your employer, in the form of taxes, insurance, and whatnot else. Then, what's left goes through another filter. This second filter is what you can control. This filter is your debts. Your rent, your mortgage, your car payment, and any other debts you may have, including college loans, etc. Do what you can to keep that second filter small, and you'll find better financial freedom than the bums making 6 figures and chained to a college degree. There were very little differences between me and the guy I compared myself to, which allows for our data to avoid being skewed. So again, I think it's one of the realest examples out there. Don't subscribe to the college pill that schools are force-feeding you. And it's a really hard focus for you to break down when you're force-fed this information at such a young and impressionable age. But you have to also embrace forming your own opinions, and not being afraid of those opinions being wrong. Think outside the box and do things different from everyone else. Because no one ever got ahead in life by doing what everyone else is doing. Leverage what you can in your lifestyle to set you up for success, rather than tacking on hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of debt for the promise of maybe having a higher salary. A salary which, mind you, I'm now making for having just stuck to it and done the work. That's the way around the college scheme, and a solid way to win financially in this life, all without breaking your back either. So if you haven't gone to college yet, then focus these years on setting yourself up for a financially comfortable life instead. Aim to pay off your car, aim to pay down a house. Those are 2 things you need in this life, and 2 payments that most people cannot avoid. So if you can lessen or mitigate them entirely, then you're ahead of anyone else in this life. And if you've already gone through and made that choice for college, then still focus your life on financial comfort. You may not be able to throw as much at it as you want to, because that second filter of yours is just so fierce, but you can still make good moves. And I bet if you think on your situation creatively, then you'll find an even better way out and to set yourself up for better financial success. I write my own novels, and they're available on Amazon. Links are in the bio. If you were to check them out, I'd be forever grateful. I suggest starting with Dusty Little Wastelanders or anything published after that, as those feature my strongest writing yet. If you're still struggling with finding ways to set yourself up for financial freedom, I focus this channel on those goals and general productivity goals as well. So check out really any of the videos in this series, and you're bound to get some good information there. Now, go out there and start some changes, bud.